Welcome to Orbit into Sleep. Tonight's video is called Relaxing Eating in Space Facts to Fall Asleep To. So, hello you. Welcome back, or if this is your first time here, welcome in. I'm really glad you're here. Go ahead and get yourself settled. Pull the covers up, find that perfect spot on your pillow, and just let your body sink into the mattress a little. Tonight, we're going to float gently through one of the most fascinating topics you could imagine. We're going to talk about eating in space. From the very first meal ever eaten above the clouds, to astronauts growing their own vegetables on the International Space Station, and even baking cookies in orbit. There are so many wonderful little stories to share with you, and we're going to take our time with every single one. Before we drift off together, I have a tiny little favor to ask. If you enjoy falling asleep with us, would you mind tapping that like button and maybe subscribing? It really does help other people who are lying awake at night find their way here, and honestly, that means a lot to us. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know roughly how many hours of sleep you normally get each night. We're always curious, and it helps us understand what you need from these videos. Now then, close your eyes whenever you're ready. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to take notes. Just let the words wash over you like a warm, gentle wave. If your mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. Let it wander. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. Let's begin. So, let's start right at the very beginning. Back when humans first looked up at the stars and wondered what it would be like to live among them. One of the simplest questions anyone asked was, "Can you even eat up there?" It sounds almost silly now, but back in the late 1950s, scientists genuinely weren't sure. Nobody had ever tried to swallow food without gravity pulling it downward. It was a real mystery, and solving it became one of the earliest challenges of the space age. To understand why eating in space is so different, we need to talk about something that happens to every single astronaut the moment they leave Earth. It's called the fluid shift. On the ground, gravity pulls your body's fluids downward, and they tend to settle in your legs and lower body. You don't really notice it because it's been happening your entire life. But the moment you reach orbit and gravity lets go, all of that fluid drifts upward. About 1.5 to 2 liters of liquid slowly migrates toward your chest, your neck, and your head. Within the first day or two, astronauts develop what's sometimes called puffy face syndrome. Their faces swell slightly, and their nasal passages become congested. Imagine having a really heavy head cold, the kind where you can barely breathe through your nose and nothing tastes quite right. That's essentially what happens. And here's the really interesting part. Around 80% of what we perceive as flavor actually comes from our sense of smell, not our taste buds. So when your nose is blocked, food suddenly becomes bland and flat, almost like eating with a peg on your nose. Now, the congestion does ease after a few weeks as the body adjusts, but astronauts say that food never tastes quite the same up there as it does on Earth. And there's another subtle reason for that. Inside the space station, the air is constantly recycled. There are fans humming, machines running, and a whole cocktail of background smells from equipment and everyday life. All of those ambient odors compete with the aroma of food, making it even harder for the brain to pick out the flavors of a meal. It's like trying to smell a single flower in a room full of perfume. So, what do astronauts do about it? Well, they reach for the strong stuff. Mission planners learned early on that providing really pungent condiments makes a huge difference. Things like wasabi, hot sauce, and liquid salt and pepper became essential items on the menu. They give the dulled senses something bold to grab onto, a little kick that cuts through the fog. It's a small thing, but it makes mealtime so much more enjoyable, and that matters more than you might think when you're living in a tin can millions of miles from home. Now, let's go back to the very first meal ever eaten in space. It was April 1961, and Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was aboard the Vostok 1 spacecraft. He became not only the first human in space, but the first person to eat there. His meal was beef and liver paste, followed by chocolate sauce, and both came squeezed out of little aluminum tubes, a bit like toothpaste. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't gourmet, but it proved something extraordinary. A human being could swallow and digest food without gravity. That one small meal opened the door to everything that followed. The following year, in 1962, American astronaut John Glenn had his own orbital lunch. He ate applesauce from a similar squeeze tube during his flight aboard Friendship 7. Again, nothing fancy, but every bite was a tiny experiment, carefully observed and recorded. Scientists back on the ground were watching closely because they still weren't entirely sure how the digestive system would cope. And that brings us to one of the loveliest little details about how your body works. The reason you can eat in space, and the reason food doesn't just float around inside your stomach, is a process called peristalsis. Your digestive system doesn't rely on gravity at all. Instead, the muscles lining your esophagus, stomach, and intestines contract in slow, rhythmic waves, gently squeezing food along its path from top to bottom. Think of it like a soft, rolling massage moving through your entire digestive tract. It works whether you're standing up, lying down, or floating upside down in orbit. Scientists tested this on Earth by asking people to swallow food while lying in various positions, even upside down, and the esophagus managed beautifully every time. The pressure generated by those muscular contractions is more than enough to move food wherever it needs to go, no matter which way you're oriented. It's one of those wonderful reminders that your body is far more clever than you might give it credit for. But there is one funny little side effect of eating without gravity that astronauts discovered quite early on. On Earth, when you have gas in your stomach, gravity separates it from the liquid. The gas rises to the top, and when you burp, only air comes up. Simple enough. But in microgravity, gas and liquid don't separate. They swirl together into a sort of frothy mixture. So when an astronaut tries to burp, what comes up isn't just air. It's a little bit of everything, a mixture of gas and liquid that's been described as a wet burp. And yes, it's about as unpleasant as it sounds. It's essentially a very mild form of being sick. Because of this, carbonated drinks are generally kept off the menu. Fizzy water, sodas, sparkling anything, they all introduce extra gas into the stomach, and in microgravity, that just makes the whole situation worse. So astronauts tend to stick with still drinks, and they've learned to eat slowly and carefully to avoid swallowing too much air with their food. It's funny, isn't it? Something as simple as a burp becomes a genuine engineering problem when you take gravity out of the equation. As you lie there tonight, just notice how effortless it all is for you. Your body knows exactly what to do. Every swallow, every breath, every quiet little process happening inside you right now is being taken care of without you having to think about it at all. Your muscles are softening, your breathing is slowing down, and all those clever systems inside you are working perfectly, just as they always do. Let that thought be a comfort to you. Everything is being looked after. You don't need to do a thing. Let's carry on gently to the next part of our journey. Now, those very early space meals, the ones that came in squeeze tubes, they did the job. They proved that eating in orbit was possible, but there was a problem. Astronauts really didn't enjoy them. And when you don't enjoy your food, you don't eat enough of it. The meals were hidden away inside metal tubes, so you couldn't see what you were eating. You couldn't smell it properly either. You just squeeze a paste into your mouth and try to get on with your day. There was no color, no texture, no ritual. It was fuel, nothing more. And human beings, as it turns out, need so much more than fuel. During one of the early Mercury missions, astronaut Gordon Cooper flew for 34 hours. He'd been given over 2,300 calories of food for the trip, but he only ate 696. That's less than a third of what he needed, not because the food was unavailable, but because it was so unappealing that he simply couldn't bring himself to eat it. And he wasn't alone. Many of the early astronauts came back lighter than when they left, not because of some exotic space effect, but because the food was just too unpleasant to finish. That quiet little rebellion of the appetite taught mission planners something incredibly important. It doesn't matter how perfectly balanced a meal is if nobody wants to eat it. Food has to look good. It has to smell good. It has to feel like a meal. Otherwise, the body goes without, and that's dangerous on a long mission. So as space programs grew more ambitious, the food had to grow with them. By the mid-1960s, the Gemini missions were lasting much longer than the early Mercury flights, sometimes up to 2 weeks. You can't survive on toothpaste tubes for a fortnight. NASA needed something better. This is when freeze drying entered the picture. Freeze drying, or lyophilization, if you want the lovely scientific word for it, is a process where food is frozen and then all the moisture is gently removed under vacuum. What you're left with is a lightweight, shelf-stable block of food that can sit happily for months or even years without going off. When you're ready to eat, you just add water, and the food plumps back up to something close to its original form. Gemini was also the first spacecraft to use fuel cells for power, and those fuel cells produced water as a byproduct. So for the first time, astronauts had a supply of water they could use to rehydrate their meals. It was a neat little loop. the same system keeping the lights on was also making dinner possible. Alongside the freeze-dried meals, NASA introduced bite-sized cubes. These were compact little blocks of food designed to be popped into the mouth in one go. But crumbs were a serious worry. In microgravity, crumbs don't fall to the floor. They float. They drift into instrument panels. They get into eyes. They clog air filters. A tiny breadcrumb that you'd never even notice on Earth becomes a genuine hazard when it's floating freely through a spacecraft. So those early cubes were coated in a thin layer of edible gelatin to hold everything together and stop bits from breaking off. It's a strange thought, isn't it? Something as harmless as a crumb becoming a safety concern. But when everything floats, everything matters. Then came one of the most charming little scandals in the whole history of space exploration. It was March the 23rd, 1965, and astronauts John Young and Gus Grissom were aboard Gemini 3. The mission was going smoothly until Young reached into the pocket of his pressure suit and pulled out a corned beef sandwich. A real one. He'd bought it from a restaurant in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and smuggled it on board. He offered it to Grissom, who took a bite. And almost immediately, the rye bread began to crumble. Little pieces of bread started floating around the cabin, drifting toward the instruments and controls. Grissom quickly stuffed it away to stop the mess from getting any worse. The whole thing lasted only a few seconds, but it caused quite a stir back on Earth. There was actually a congressional hearing about it. A representative named George Shipley called it a foolish breach of safety, and while Young was never formally punished, the incident led to much stricter rules about what astronauts could bring on board. No more unauthorized snacks, especially nothing that might produce crumbs. It also pushed NASA to search harder for a proper bread alternative, something that could work in microgravity without breaking apart. And that search eventually led to one of the most beloved items in the history of space food, the tortilla. It was 1985 when Mexican payload specialist Rodolfo Neri Vela first brought tortillas to the space shuttle, and they were an instant hit. Tortillas are soft, they're flexible, they don't crumble. You can wrap almost anything in them, spread things on them, fold them, roll them. They're perfect for making little wraps and what astronauts affectionately started calling space tacos. From that moment on, tortillas became a staple of the space diet. They replaced bread entirely. And if you think about it, there's something rather wonderful about that. A simple, ancient food, something that's been made by hand for thousands of years, turned out to be the ideal solution to a very modern problem. No laboratory invention, no high-tech engineering, just a tortilla. By the time the Apollo missions came along in the late 1960s, things had improved again. Apollo introduced something called the spoon bowl. It was a plastic pouch with a zip opening at the top, and it allowed astronauts to eat with an actual spoon for the first time. The food inside was moist enough that surface tension held it to the utensil, so it wouldn't float away between the bowl and your mouth. That might sound like a small thing, but imagine eating every single meal for a week by squeezing paste into your mouth or popping tiny cubes. Then suddenly, you're holding a spoon, you're scooping food, you're eating the way you eat at home. That simple, familiar motion made astronauts feel more human, more connected to their lives on Earth. And that emotional comfort turned out to be just as important as the calories. Apollo 7 also carried something that's become one of the most famous myths in space food history: freeze-dried ice cream. You've probably seen it in museum gift shops, those little packets of chalky, crumbly, vaguely sweet stuff. But here's the lovely truth: it only actually flew once. The astronauts found it impractical because it was fragile and produced too many crumbs, the very thing everyone was trying to avoid. So it was quietly dropped from the menu after that single flight. But somehow it became the souvenir that everyone associates with space food. Funny how that works. Then, in 1973, everything changed with Skylab. Skylab was America's first space station, and it had something no spacecraft had ever had before: a proper kitchen. Well, a galley. It had a dedicated dining area with foot restraints so astronauts could anchor themselves while they ate. It had a freezer. It had a refrigerator. And the menu offered 72 different items, including filet mignon and lobster Newburg. 72 choices. Just a decade earlier, astronauts were squeezing paste from a tube, and now they were sitting down to steak and lobster. It was a transformation, and it worked. The astronauts on Skylab maintained their body weight far better than any previous crew. They ate well, they felt well, and their performance reflected it. That lesson, that good food leads to good health and good morale, has guided every space food program ever since. It's not about luxury, it's about care. It's about recognizing that human beings need to feel nourished, not just fed. And you know, the same is true right here, right now, in your own bed. You deserve to feel cared for. You deserve rest, so let your shoulders drop a little further. Let your jaw relax. Let your eyes stay softly closed. We'll keep going whenever you're ready. There's no rush at all. Now, there's a part of the space food story that quietly changed life for every single person on Earth, including you. And most people have absolutely no idea it happened. It's one of those beautiful hidden connections between the stars above and the supermarket down the road. Back in the late 1950s, NASA had a problem. They needed to guarantee that every single item of food sent into space was completely safe. No bacteria, no contamination, nothing that could make an astronaut ill, because up there, there's no hospital, no pharmacy, no popping out to see the doctor. A case of food poisoning in orbit could be genuinely dangerous. At the time, the way food safety worked on Earth was pretty simple. You'd make a big batch of something, then test samples from the end of the production line. If the samples were clean, you'd assume the whole batch was fine, but that approach had a flaw. To be really confident, you'd need to test a huge percentage of the batch, and testing destroys the food. You can't eat what you've tested. So with a limited and very precious space food supply, destroying large amounts of it just to check for safety wasn't practical. NASA turned to the Pillsbury Company for help. Pillsbury was one of the biggest food manufacturers in America, and they had a brilliant microbiologist named Howard Bauman. Together with NASA and the U.S. Army Natick Laboratories, Bauman developed an entirely new approach. Instead of checking the food at the end, they would monitor every single step of the production process. They would identify all the places where something could go wrong and then put controls in place to make sure it didn't. They called it the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points System. You might hear it referred to as HACCP, and it works on 7 simple principles. First, you analyze all the potential hazards. Then you identify the critical points in production where contamination could occur. You set strict limits at each of those points. You establish ways to monitor them. You create corrective actions for when something goes wrong. You verify that the whole system is working. And finally, you keep detailed records of everything. It sounds almost obvious when you hear it laid out like that. But at the time, it was revolutionary. It shifted the entire philosophy of food safety from reaction to prevention. Don't wait for a problem. Stop it from ever happening. And here's the part that touches your life. That system, originally designed to keep astronauts safe in orbit, was eventually adopted by food manufacturers all over the world. Today, HACCP is the global standard for food safety. Every restaurant, every factory, every supermarket you've ever visited operates under some version of the principles that Howard Bauman and NASA created together. Every time you pick something off a shelf and trust that it's safe to eat, you're benefiting from a system that was born in the space program. It's a lovely thought, isn't it? A quiet gift from the stars to your kitchen table. The standards for space food itself are incredibly strict. Every item must have a total aerobic bacterial count of no more than 20,000 colony-forming units per gram, and there must be a complete absence of dangerous pathogens like Salmonella and E. coli. The food is tested and retested at every stage, and nothing makes it onto a spacecraft unless it passes every single check. And because the International Space Station doesn't have dedicated cold storage for the main food supply, almost everything has to be shelf-stable at room temperature. That means the food is processed using various methods to make it last. Some is freeze-dried, just like those early Gemini meals, ready to be rehydrated with water. Some is thermostabilized, which means it's been heat-treated in special pouches called retort pouches to kill any microorganisms. Some is irradiated, exposed to controlled doses of radiation to destroy bacteria without significantly changing the taste. And some is kept in its natural form. Things like nuts and dried fruit that are naturally stable. Each method has its own strengths, and mission planners mix and match them to create a menu that's safe, varied, and as enjoyable as possible. It's a careful balancing act between science and comfort, between what keeps you alive and what keeps you happy. Now, speaking of happiness, let me tell you about one of the most wonderful stories in the whole history of space food. In 2015, a very special machine arrived at the International Space Station. It was called the IS Espresso, and it was the first proper espresso machine ever sent to orbit. It was a collaboration between the Italian coffee company Lavazza, a space engineering firm called Argotec, and the Italian Space Agency, and it was built to solve a very specific craving. Astronauts had been drinking instant coffee from pouches for years, and while it did the job, it wasn't exactly a rich, aromatic espresso experience. Anyone who loves coffee will understand that instant just isn't the same. But building a coffee machine for space is far more complicated than it sounds. On Earth, an espresso machine pushes hot water through finely ground coffee at high pressure. The machine has to handle boiling water, steam, and pressure changes, all of which behave very differently in microgravity. So the IS Espresso was built with steel tubing instead of plastic to withstand pressures of up to 400 bars. That's an extraordinary amount of force, far beyond what any kitchen machine on Earth would need. Italian astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti became the first person to drink a freshly brewed espresso in space. And she drank it from something equally special, a little vessel called the Zero-G cup. This cup was designed specifically to work without gravity. On Earth, you lift a cup to your lips and gravity does the rest, pulling the liquid toward your mouth. In space, the liquid just sits there, clinging to the walls of the container in a shapeless blob. The Zero-G cup uses the natural forces of capillary action and surface tension to guide the coffee along a curved inner edge, drawing it gently toward the drinker's lips. It lets astronauts sip from an open vessel, which might sound unremarkable, but after months of drinking everything through a straw from a sealed pouch, the simple act of sipping from a cup feels like a tiny miracle. It reconnects you to something deeply familiar, that warm, quiet ritual of sitting with a cup of coffee. And in the isolation of space, that kind of comfort is priceless. Now, let me tell you about another food pioneer who turned his attention to the stars. His name was Momofuku Ando, and he's the person who invented instant noodles. By 2005, Ando was 95 years old, and he had one final dream. He wanted to send his noodles into space. Working with Japanese astronaut Soichi Noguchi, Ando and his team created something called Space Ram. Instant noodles designed specifically for microgravity. And they had to solve two rather tricky problems. The first was the noodles themselves. On Earth, instant noodles are long and stringy. You slurp them up, and gravity helps them hang neatly from your fork or chopsticks. In space, long noodles would float and drift in every direction, tangling themselves around anything nearby. So Ando's team shaped the noodles into small, compact, ball-shaped clusters that were easy to manage and didn't dangle. The second problem was the water temperature. Normally, instant noodles need boiling water to cook properly, but on the space station, the hot water dispensers only reach about 70 degrees Celsius. Water behaves differently under the station's pressurized atmosphere, and a rolling boil just isn't available. So the noodles were specially formulated to soften and rehydrate at that lower temperature. The broth was thickened too, so it would cling to the noodles rather than floating away as loose liquid. It was a small, beautiful act of engineering, driven by one man's lifelong love of a simple comfort food. Momofuku Ando passed away just 2 years later, but his space noodles remain one of the most charming chapters in the story of orbital dining. And then there's the cookie. In December 2019, astronauts on the International Space Station did something that had never been done before. They baked food from raw ingredients in space. The item they chose was a chocolate chip cookie, specifically the classic DoubleTree by Hilton recipe. A small, specially designed oven called the Zero-G oven was sent up to the station for the experiment. On Earth, baking relies on convection. Hot air rises, circulating around the food and cooking it evenly. Gases inside the dough expand, giving the cookie its shape and texture. But in microgravity, hot air doesn't rise. There's no up for it to go to, so the heat distribution is completely different, and the whole baking process slows down dramatically. On Earth, those cookies would take about 15 to 20 minutes. In space, they took between 120 and 130 minutes, over 2 hours for a single cookie. And instead of spreading flat the way cookies do on a baking tray, they puffed up into little spheres. Without gravity pulling the dough downward, it expanded equally in every direction, like a tiny edible planet. The cookies were brought back to Earth for analysis and are now displayed at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. They're a testament to human curiosity, this wonderful instinct we have to take something ordinary and see what happens when we change the rules. And you know, curiosity is a beautiful thing. But right now, your only job is to rest. Let your thoughts drift wherever they'd like to go. Maybe you're imagining a little round cookie floating gently through a space station. Maybe you're thinking about something else entirely. Whatever comes to mind, just let it be there. Don't chase it. Don't push it away. You're doing wonderfully. Let's float on to the next part together. Now let's talk about something truly remarkable: growing food in space. Because while freeze-dried meals and retort pouches have served astronauts well for decades, there's a limit to how far you can go with pre-packaged supplies. If humanity ever wants to reach Mars, we need to learn how to farm among the stars. A round trip to Mars takes a minimum of about 1,000 days. That's nearly 3 years. You can't pack 3 years of food onto a spacecraft. The weight alone would be staggering, and every kilogram you add makes the journey more expensive and more difficult. So the answer, eventually, has to be growing fresh food along the way. In 2014, a small gardening unit called Veggie was installed on the International Space Station. It's a compact, portable growing chamber, not much bigger than a carry-on suitcase, and it was designed to test whether plants could be grown successfully in orbit. The plants sit in little pouches called pillows, filled with a clay-based substrate and a controlled release fertilizer. Above them, a bank of LED lights provides the energy they need to photosynthesize. The lights glow red, blue, and green, each color chosen for a specific role in the plant's growth cycle. Red light drives photosynthesis most efficiently. Blue light helps regulate the way the plant grows, encouraging compact, sturdy stems. And green light, well, green light is mostly there for the humans. Under just red and blue LEDs, the plants look dark and almost purple, which makes it very hard to spot any signs of disease or stress. Adding green light makes the leaves appear a more natural color, so the astronauts can keep an eye on their little garden and notice if anything looks wrong. It's a small detail, but it's such a human one. Even in space, we want our plants to look like plants. On the 10th of August, 2015, something quietly historic happened. The crew of Expedition 44 gathered around the veggie unit and ate the first food ever grown in space. It was red romaine lettuce, a variety called outrageous, chosen for its hardiness and its vibrant color. The astronauts cleaned the leaves with citric acid sanitizing wipes, and then, one by one, they each took a bite. Scott Kelly described it as tasting good. That might sound like a modest review, but think about what it really means. A human being floating 250 miles above the Earth ate a leaf that had grown from seed in that same orbiting laboratory. No supply ship brought it. No factory packaged it. It grew right there in the gentle glow of colored LEDs, fed by nothing more than water, light, and a handful of nutrients. Since that first lettuce harvest, the space station's garden has expanded beautifully. Astronauts have grown Mizuna mustard, a peppery Japanese green that was served during a Thanksgiving meal in orbit. They've grown radishes, harvested in 2020 as part of an experiment studying how root vegetables develop without the directional pull of gravity. The roots still grew downward, guided by their own internal sense of direction rather than by weight. Plants are far more resourceful than we sometimes give them credit for. And then, in 2021, came the chili peppers. Hatch chiles specifically, grown as part of a long-running experiment on the station. Chili peppers are more complex to grow than leafy greens. They take longer to mature, they need to be pollinated, and they're more sensitive to their environment. But the crew managed it beautifully, and when the peppers were finally harvested, the astronauts did what anyone would do. They made tacos, fresh space-grown peppers wrapped in tortillas, the first tacos ever made with ingredients grown in orbit. There's something so warm about that image. Astronauts floating around a table, sharing tacos made from peppers they grew themselves. It's not so different from a family gathering vegetables from their garden on a summer evening. Even hundreds of miles above the Earth, that simple pleasure of eating something you've nurtured from a tiny seed still means the world. But growing the occasional salad leaf is just the beginning. For long-duration missions to Mars and beyond, scientists are working on something far more ambitious. They're called bioregenerative life support systems, and the idea is to weave plants into every part of the spacecraft's life support. The concept works like this. Astronauts breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So a carefully managed crop of plants could help scrub the air inside a spacecraft, reducing the need for mechanical carbon dioxide removal systems. At the same time, plants release water vapor through their leaves in a process called transpiration, and that moisture can be collected and purified for drinking. So plants could provide food, clean the air, and help recycle water all at once. 3 jobs, 1 beautiful system. Researchers are exploring which combination of crops would work best together, what they call constructed fit plant communities. The goal is to find a mix of species that complement each other, providing a balanced diet while also performing their air and water duties efficiently. Alongside traditional crops, scientists are looking at some less conventional food sources too. Insects, for instance. Silkworms and crickets are both incredibly efficient at converting feed into protein, and they take up very little space. Mushrooms are another possibility because mycelia can be grown on food scraps, turning waste into nutrition. It's a whole ecosystem in miniature, a tiny version of the cycles that sustain life on Earth, carefully recreated inside a metal shell hurtling through the void. And there's one more benefit to all of this gardening that goes beyond nutrition and air quality. It's psychological. Studies have shown that the simple act of tending to plants, watering them, watching them grow, offers a powerful sense of comfort and purpose. In the monotony of a long space mission, where every day looks much the same and the view outside is an unchanging sea of black, having something alive and green to care for can make an enormous difference to mental well-being. Astronauts have described their time in the veggie garden as one of the most enjoyable parts of their day. There's a rhythm to it, a patience, a quiet satisfaction in seeing a tiny sprout push up through the substrate. It connects them to something ancient and grounding, the same instinct that has driven humans to cultivate the earth for thousands of years. And perhaps, lying in your own bed right now, you can understand that feeling, that gentle pull toward something natural and simple, the comfort of knowing that things grow slowly and steadily without being rushed. You're doing so well. Your breathing is easy. Your body is heavy and warm. And just like those little plants on the space station, you don't need to do anything at all right now except be exactly where you are. Let's take a quiet moment here, and when you're ready, we'll carry on. And now, before we drift into the next part, just a gentle word. If you're someone who finds it tricky to fall asleep, or if you often wake up during the night and struggle to drift off again, we sometimes share helpful bits and pieces in the description below this video. Little things that might make bedtime easier for you. There's no pressure at all. Just have a look whenever you feel like it and see if anything there might be useful. We just want you to get the rest you deserve. Now here's something I find really fascinating. We've talked about how the fluid shift affects taste and how a blocked nose makes food seem bland. But there's another hidden force at work on the space station that changes the way food tastes, and it's one you might not expect. It's sound. The International Space Station is a noisy place. There are fans running constantly, circulating air through the modules to stop pockets of carbon dioxide from forming. There are water pumps, cooling systems, experiment hardware, all of it humming and whirring around the clock. The average background noise on the station sits at about 72 decibels. That's roughly the level of a busy restaurant or a vacuum cleaner running in the next room. It's not loud enough to damage your hearing over a normal work shift, but astronauts don't get to leave at the end of the day. They live in that sound 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months on end. And here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists studying something called cross-modal perception have discovered that background noise doesn't just annoy you, it actually changes the way your brain processes flavor. In experiments using broad-spectrum noise, similar to the hum of an aircraft cabin, researchers found that loud background sound selectively affects different tastes. Sweetness, for instance, becomes harder to detect. If you're eating something sweet in a noisy environment, your brain dials down its perception of that sweetness. The food tastes less sugary, less satisfying, less rewarding. But umami, that deep, savory, almost meaty flavor found in things like mushrooms, aged cheese, and soy sauce, actually becomes stronger. The noise seems to amplify it, and the more umami there is in the food, the bigger the boost. So the blandness that astronauts experience isn't just about a stuffy nose. It's also about the constant hum of the station reshaping their experience of flavor at a neurological level. Sweetness fades, savoriness grows. The entire palette of taste shifts, and most people have no idea it's happening. This discovery has some really lovely implications for the future. It suggests that mission planners might one day be able to design the soundscape of a spacecraft's dining area to improve the taste of food. Imagine a quiet corner of a Mars habitat, acoustically shielded from the machinery, where the crew can sit down to eat in relative peace. Just reducing the background noise could make sweet foods taste sweet again. Or, going even further, playing carefully chosen ambient sounds during mealtimes could be used to nudge flavor perception in a helpful direction. Scientists have started calling this idea sonic seasoning, adjusting what you hear to change what you taste. It's a wonderful thought that something as simple as a quieter room could make dinner more enjoyable for someone living millions of miles from home. And while we're talking about things that affect how astronauts experience their meals, let's spend a moment on something deeply human: the psychology of eating together. On the International Space Station, mealtimes are one of the few moments in the day when the entire crew comes together. The rest of the time, astronauts are often working on separate experiments in different modules, sometimes barely seeing each other for hours. But at mealtimes, they gather. They float around a small table, Velcro their food pouches to the surface, and they share a meal. It might not look like a dinner party. There are no tablecloths, no candles, no clinking glasses. But the function is exactly the same. It's a moment of connection, a pause in the working day where people sit together, talk, talk, laugh, share stories about their lives back home, and that matters enormously. The crew of the space station is international. You might have a Russian commander, an American flight engineer, a Japanese scientist, and a European mission specialist all eating together. And one of the loveliest traditions that has developed is the sharing of national cuisines. Russian cosmonauts bring borscht and tinned fish. Japanese astronauts share specially prepared sushi. Americans contribute barbecue-flavored dishes and peanut butter. Each person's food carries a little piece of their home, their culture, their identity. And when you offer someone a taste of your favorite dish, you're offering them a glimpse of who you are. Researchers studying group dynamics in isolated environments have found that these communal meals are one of the most powerful tools for building trust and reducing tension. There's even a concept called emotional contagion, which describes how the mood of one person at a shared table can gently spread to the others. When someone is relaxed and enjoying their food, that ease ripples outward. The whole group benefits. Positive feelings grow. Stress softens. It's a reminder that eating has never really been just about nutrition. It's about belonging. It's about feeling less alone. Now, there's another challenge that mission planners worry about, especially when thinking about those long journeys to Mars. It's called menu fatigue, and it's exactly what it sounds like. When you eat the same rotation of meals over and over for months on end, you gradually lose interest. The food hasn't changed. It's the same quality, the same flavor, the same nutrition, but your desire to eat it fades. On a 6-month mission to the space station, astronauts have reported that their favorite meals stay enjoyable, but everything else starts to feel dull and repetitive. They eat less. They lose weight. Their energy dips. And their mood suffers too, because mealtimes stop being something to look forward to and start feeling like a chore. To combat this, NASA and the European Space Agency have started working with some of the finest chefs on Earth. Michelin-starred cooks have been invited to design special meals for astronauts, what they call crew choice meals. These are reserved for birthdays, holidays, and milestones, little moments of culinary luxury that break the monotony and give the crew something to anticipate. French astronaut Sophie Astronaut, preparing for her mission, will have access to meals crafted by the celebrated chef Anne-Sophie Pic. Dishes like lobster bisque and smoked vanilla rice pudding, carefully adapted for the constraints of space but designed with all the care and artistry of a fine restaurant kitchen. It's a beautiful collision of worlds. Haute cuisine meets aerospace engineering, and the effect isn't just about the taste, it's about the surprise, the novelty, the feeling that someone back on Earth thought about you, cared enough to create something special for you. In a place where so much is routine and predictable, that unexpected burst of flavor and creativity can lift the spirits in a way that nothing else quite manages. There's something in that for all of us, I think. The value of a small, unexpected pleasure. A treat you didn't see coming. A moment that breaks the pattern of the day and reminds you that life has sweetness in it, even when things feel repetitive or heavy. And right now, this is your moment, this quiet time wrapped up in your blankets, listening to these gentle words. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Tonight is just for resting. Feel the weight of your body being held by the bed beneath you. Notice how your breathing has settled into its own slow, easy rhythm. You don't have to guide it. It knows exactly what to do. Let's drift on a little further together, nice and slow. And so, we've come to the end of our journey tonight. We've floated through so many wonderful little corners of this story together. From Yuri Gagarin squeezing beef paste from a tube in 1961, to astronauts growing their own chili peppers and making tacos in orbit. From the quiet genius of a food safety system that now protects every meal you've ever eaten, to the simple joy of sipping espresso from a cup designed to work without gravity. From the way sound can change the taste of sugar on your tongue, to the way sharing a meal with someone from the other side of the world can make a tiny space station feel like home. Every single one of those stories started with the same thing: curiosity, someone wondering, what if? What if we could eat up there? What if we could grow something? What if we could bake a cookie in a place where hot air doesn't rise? And each time, the answer turned out to be more surprising, more beautiful, and more human than anyone expected. You don't need to hold on to any of it. If something stuck with you, lovely. If it's all already fading into a soft, warm blur, that's lovely too. Your mind will keep whatever it wants to keep, and let the rest dissolve like sugar in warm water. In a moment, some gentle music is going to start playing. It's there for you, for as long as you need it. You don't have to listen to it with any focus. Just let it sit in the background like a soft blanket of sound, something for your thoughts to rest on as they slow down and wander wherever they'd like to go. Maybe you'll think of stars, maybe you'll think of gardens, maybe you'll think of nothing at all, and that would be the most perfect thing. You've done so well tonight. You showed up, you lay down, you gave yourself permission to rest, and that takes more courage than most people realize. So good night from all of us here at Orbit Into Sleep. We'll be right here whenever you need us. Sleep well, and we'll see you next time.